Hey people, it's Wall here with Wallcraft, bringing you a very, very special thing today. This is the largest content patch that has hit Wallcraft thus far. I have been working my ass off this entire week. I've put in probably about 100 hours this week alone to bring this. This is the Ogre, the Goblin, the Inscription, the Survival, and most of all, the Hardcore mode. I started doing all of this work about a week ago, and I have put in an insane amount of time ironing out all the details, hammering out all the little things just to make sure that this is magic. So, we're not going to delay, we're going to get right into it. First off, we're going to showcase the Ogre. Ogre Playable Race. Now, it's still an early alpha stage right now, so it's only available for alpha testers, but log on, ask me for it. Maybe I'll hook you up with the model for it. This is full Ogre Playable Race, too. This isn't just some janky reskin. This is the vanilla Ogre, of course. This isn't a backport. This is the vanilla Ogre with geo sets assigned. So it's got the full armor kit. There's still a few model details I'm hammering out. Mostly the boots are cutting off parts of the leg, but we'll get that there. But yeah, this is absolutely phenomenal. And of course, not just the Ogre. We're gonna go with the Goblin. Look at that. Wallcraft Goblin. So you have Ogre, you have Goblin as a playable race now in Wallcraft. It's a very, very special occasion here. And again, this isn't some janky reskin. This is full, fleshed out, new races to Wallcraft. Now, because I choose not to use a modified hacked client, I use the default 1.12 vanilla client with just a custom patch, and that's mostly done for security purposes. I'm personally not a fan of custom executables because you can't really verify what you're running, so I'd rather have it be open sourced with a custom patch that you can extract from. You can view all the contents of it. So the biggest part of not having a custom client is, and just sticking with custom patch, is that you can't change the interface menus. So if I were to, let's just say, create a new character, I can't add new races without a custom patch because of the LUA and the XML glues that are used. But these races are very special. They're not traditional. The Ogre and the Goblin are accessible by unlocking them in-game, where if you reach Exalted with all of the Steam Needle cartel reputations, Gadgetzan, Everlook, Booty Bay, and Ratchet, you unlock the ability to make a Goblin. It'll essentially, the game will generate you a Goblin character. Same deal with Ogre. Ogre has a reputation grind locked behind essentially trying to unite the Ogre clans in World of Warcraft and vanilla World of Warcraft. So it's a very unique experience to actually unlock them, and it's a feat of strength. You know, you're not going to see a whole lot of them running around as players. It's definitely a grind to get there, but it's very special because of that. And again, those races aren't just reskins. Let me change back to Ogre here. These aren't just reskins, these are fully implemented, fully fleshed out. So you can see it's got all the starting gear up on that. And take a look at the reputation panel. We have the Ogre reputation. Ogres are hostile towards Alliance and Horde, and they're friendly with Ogres, so you're friendly with all Ogres. Exalted, in fact, with all Ogre races. You can walk around and hang out with the Ogres. For Alliance and Horde, you're hostile towards both of them. Not on GM Island, though. GM Island is a sanctuary. With Goblins, Goblins are neutral with both Alliance and Horde. So the gameplay for Ogre and Goblin is very unique. It's not just standard roll a race and pick your faction kind of thing. A lot of later expansions for World of Warcraft, obviously Cataclysm and some private servers and stuff have implemented them, but they just put them as parts of the other factions. You know, you'll have like a Horde Goblin or even an Alliance Goblin. For Wallcraft, it's unique in that they are third factions. They are of their own. Ogres being very isolated from the other factions, with goblins being neutral parties. Now, the goblin gameplay is extremely special in that regard because you're able to go into both Alliance and Horde cities freely, since you're neutral. You can use their auction houses. You can essentially roleplay as a goblin in that regard. I could go buy cheap items on Horde auction house and take them over to the Alliance auction house and sell them. Additionally, goblins auction houses, the neutral auction houses, they have no fee for them, so goblins are the ultimate merchant. You know, you unlock a goblin, you're going to be making more money than anyone else if you're playing the markets right. Playing like a goblin. Whereas ogres, obviously, they're hostile towards Alliance and Horde. They're a more PvP-centric faction. They're friendly with ogres. Ooh. Yeah, we got a player talking to me here. Yeah, he's asking about the unlockable ogres. Yeah, he doesn't know I'm shooting a video right now, but that's fine. And, of course, last but not least, well, not even last, there's a bunch of updates. This has been a very busy week. We have survival. The survival skill is added to the game, so you have the ability to make torches, campfires, tents, various cold weather gear, and different pieces of gear that help you survive in the open world. Now, if you're familiar with Wallcraft, you know that the weather system overhaul is phenomenal. It's very dangerous. It makes the world a very dangerous place, essentially. When you're out in the open world and you have snow, it creates a stacking frozen death debuff. And the only way to really ward that off is by being indoors or using the survival skill to either forestall the debuff from stacking, which you can see the frozen death debuff stacking. You can either create a fire to prevent it from stacking, and this reduces all stats by 1%, and it will stack up to 100 times, meaning that eventually all of your stats will be reduced to 0. Your base stats, at least. You still retain the stats from gear. Well, under the effects, though, of Cozy Fire or a carried torch, it stops it from stacking. And by going indoors or using a tent or wearing cold weather survival gear, you can essentially avoid the cold weather effect. Of course, rainstorms, lightning, they're not avoidable until you have survival gear where you can make rubber boots that will prevent you from being struck by lightning. But of course, like, these things are trade-offs. You know, you're wearing survival gear, so obviously you have less stats from your gear. You might not be able to attain a full set bonus, but they definitely come in handy. Especially the lightning can be very, very dangerous. The cold weather is brutal to be out in for any extended period of time without fire or any type of coverage against it. So yeah, it's very exciting. Survival profession added. Change the weather back. Make it nice and sunny out. Of course, undead, forsaken, and dwarfs have immunity to cold weather, just as passive traits. The other factions, the other races, I should say, have different weather prevention effects built into them, but that's still being worked on. Dwarf and undead are the only ones added right now. And of course, this is a really big one, is the inscription profession. Now, I gotta level up a little bit here. Just gonna ding to 35, and we're gonna train inscription. This is a vanilla inscription. And this isn't like Wrath of the Lich King type of inscription where you're going to be making glyphs. This is a vanilla-esque skill where you can make scrolls to buff yourself and your party, and they're very powerful in Wallcraft. These are the traditional scrolls that you'd find around the world that you normally couldn't make or do anything to obtain outside of a few vendors that have limited stock. You know, Scroll of Strength, Stamina, Protection, etc. But in Wallcraft, these are unique buffs that stack with everything else, so they're very powerful in their own right. You know, the extra 17 stamina, that translates almost 350 health there. Of course, when you reach max level for it, let me go. I'm gonna unlearn this real quick. Sorry for the camera work there. A little bit of a raw video. We're going to learn everything for inscription real quick. I put the trainer up here just to prevent people from using it at the moment, since I just released Death's Trial, which we'll get to next. But take a look at the inscription, of course. You'll see something making a triumphant return. The Scroll of Kings. Now, if you're familiar, you understand that Paladin is in alpha state. It's an alpha Paladin, so you have auras instead of buffs that you're constantly having to place on people. Essentially, in Alpha WoW, the Paladin's buffs were originally auras. You had, Dominance Aura and Wisdom Aura, which were your might and your wisdom, and all the other various auras that you had. Well, because you have the auras instead of buffs now, I figured, well, let's better balance the factions. Since there was no original aura for Kings, we're just gonna take it off the table, and it balances out Horde and Alliance a lot more. Kings has finally returned in the form of the Scroll of Kings. Now, this is made with a Black Lotus ink, so it's pretty costly to make, but it's definitely worth it, considering it gives you the 30-minute 10% buff. That is very nice. Very, very phenomenal there. Take a look at who's hanging around here. Yeah, I wanted to see if he said anything before he took off. I hate ignoring people when I'm in the middle of the video here. Anywho, so we have ogres, we have goblins, we have survival, we have inscription, and you ask me, is that all? Is that really all? It's been a week since your last update. Is this all you've got to show for it? Is just new races, new factions? No, that's certainly not. There's 2 new classes as well. They're still in development. I'm not really going to introduce them right now, but we have the Goblin Technician, which is a goblin-only class that can be chosen from. It's a leather-wearing, bomb-chucking, gun-blasting maniac of a class, and it's gonna be very fun. If you're familiar with Goblin Technicians from original Warcraft titles, or from even Blackwing Lair, there's a few Goblin Technician NPCs in there. You'll kind of be familiar with what they do. They throw bombs, they run around, they yell, they explode. Fireball Inferno there. And as well, I'm working on a prototype for the Vanilla Death Knight, as announced in the previous video. This is unlocked upon clearing Naxxramas and turning in Kel'Thuzad's phylactery. So it's very difficult to even create a Death Knight in Wallcraft. It's not just something that you get for free upon hitting level 60. The Death Knight in Wallcraft is created upon turning in the phylactery. You're given an option to essentially sacrifice your character and turn him into a Death Knight. And depending on what class you sacrifice, it will gain a unique ability that harkens back to the previous class that you had sacrificed to obtain this Death Knight. So you're having to trade a max geared level 60 for this new class. It'll start with some pretty decent gear, so you're not going to be, standing there naked with the new class here. It'll have, equivalent to early Nax tier kind of gear. In regards to how it plays, it will play a bit like the later iterations, obviously, of Death Knight, but in a much more rudimentary, vanilla-esque way. So it'll feel like a vanilla class in that regard. Very steep requirement, though, to unlock it, because you have to sacrifice your character after killing Kel'Thuzad and obtaining his phylactery. So definitely a big trade-off, but definitely worth it in regards to that, because, especially how few there will be for quite some time. It's going to be a very unique, very special class. And same with the Goblin Technician. You have to achieve Exalted with all Steamweedle reputations, so all the Goblin reputations. And once you do that, you will be able to create a Goblin character. And the Goblin most likely will be restricted to either Technician. Currently I have the Warrior, the Rogue, the Mage, and the Warlock playable as Goblin. So, a little bit of extension on that. As well, something I'd like to mention too, Dwarf Mage from Alpha WoW has made a return. It's not fully implemented yet. I did have it set up on the character selection, but before I released the patch, I disabled it once more until I can really flesh it all out perfectly. I'm going to have to redo a lot in the game just to make it work. I know you're thinking too, it's just, oh, well, it's just a dwarf mage. What's special about it? The game client itself for vanilla has hard-coded restrictions on creating a dwarf mage. It's actually part of the game client. If you look through your default 1.12 vanilla client files, you'll see that dwarf mage is actually listed as a playable class. But unfortunately, Blizzard did like a really cheap hack fix by hard-coding it into the client. So there's really no way to undo that. The only way to really undo it so far that I found, there's two ways. Essentially, either create an entirely new class called Dwarf Mage class, and then mirror the traditional mage class, so you wouldn't really notice any different elements as a player, but it would technically be a new class. Or, and what I'll end up doing, because it's a lot cleaner, is simply swapping the enumerations for Warlock and Mage. Mage is listed as Class 8, Warlock is Class 9. If I swap them, then the client it will restrict Warlocks at that point, which obviously there's not going to be a Dwarf Warlock, just a Dwarf Mage, so it's going to take a little bit of work to get to that point, though, because I basically have to switch every spell for both classes, or at least the skills, and a few other things. But, you know, not that far into the future. Now, that's not all. Of course, you see this NPC, if you're familiar, this is a new NPC. It's Death's Trial, and this is the Wallcraft Hardcore mode. It's very unique and very special in regards to how Hardcore plays. We're going to go ahead and create a level 1 character so we can access it. Wallcraft Hardcore is very special, very unique. Death's Trial is the official title of the game mode, and it is a very unique new take on Hardcore. Traditionally in Hardcore, if you die, you're done. You know, it's one life, one death. Death is delete, as pioneered by people like Cargos, which it's a very fun format, but it doesn't really mesh well for MMOs, or at least how MMOs are meant to be played. Especially World of Warcraft with character progression. You die and you're done. You know, you delete your character. And trying to progress through raid tiers, it's really just a matter of time until you lag out or disconnect, or the server crashes, or something wacky happens that's really outside of your control, even if you play perfectly. Especially nowadays, you see too a lot of griefers killing off hardcore players, so it's become a bit of a problem there. Wallcraft Hardcore mode, though, is a lot less focused on not dying. It's more so focused on character progression and progressing beyond death. So the way that it works is you talk to this NPC, and you can flag yourself for Death's Trial. When you flag yourself for Death's Trial, you will be teleported back to your starting zone. Your gear will be stripped, and you'll be given the set of badges. Now, these badges are all very unique, and they fade upon certain conditions. So if you fail, the badge will disappear. The only one that doesn't ever disappear is the Death's Trial, which is the hardcore flag. Now, the way that Wallcraft Hardcore plays is anytime you die, you are automatically sent back to your Hearthstone location, and all of your gear is deleted. So it's not just one life mode, it is progressing beyond death. Anything that you're carrying on your character or in your bags is at risk. So going into the latest raid tier, pushing progression with your guild as hardcores is very risky, because you're risking whatever gear you're bringing. And this often leads to creation of a new meta, where essentially you want to ensure that the gear that you're risking is something that you can live with dying. It often means that putting your hard-obtained loot from raids into the bank and accumulating stuff that you don't mind expending, especially when you're doing dangerous dungeons and open-world activities, stuff like that. Having sets of cheaply crafted gear is a very advisable position on that. And that's because Wallcraft, of course, is a PvP-centric server. So you're out in the open world in PvP flag situations. You're definitely going to be getting ganked, and you're definitely going to be dying. There is no PvE mode on Wallcraft. So walking around, doing quests and whatnot, it's always good idea to have your professions maxed and make sure that you can craft new gear to replace whatever stuff that you might be losing. Banking your items, banking any valuable items especially, and not carrying them around is very, very big part of the meta. Now, the only things that don't really get deleted are your gold and your bags. You'll retain those. And while you're in the hardcore mode, Death's Trial, you are not able to trade, you're not able to use the auction house, and you're not able to use the mailbox. So there's a few restrictions on essentially what you can do, but not really so much that stops the natural flow of the game. Those things are added simply to ensure that your character's progression is solely based off of your own merits, where you're not farming gear on an alt and then sending it to your hardcore tune, because that just diminishes the value of the game. So let's take a look at the badges. We have, of course, the main one, Death's Trial. Upon dying, you are returned to your bind location. All carried items are destroyed upon death. And just reading this, you might be asking, well, what about my hearthstone? If you'll notice, I don't have a hearthstone, and that's because hearths are now part of your general spell set. You no longer have to waste an inventory slot carrying around a hearthstone. It's just a baseline cast spell, same functionality, but it's now in your spell book instead of an actual item. And this makes hardcore a little bit easier, especially too when you die, you return to your bind location, which there's an innkeeper there. Obviously, you can give you another hearthstone if they still existed, but it's a sake of convenience, especially because a lot of players would forget to grab a new one. So just avoid that altogether. The second one, of course, is the Immortal. This badge indicates that you have actually never died on this character, so this is more like the traditional hardcore. If I were to die, I would lose this this badge here. So, trying to progress and retain the amount of badges, or going for a specific badge on your character, is kind of like a feat of strength, and upon reaching level 60, you are awarded a special unique cosmetic item for whatever badges that you still have retained up until that point. Some of them are very difficult, though. If you'll notice, the next badge, the Broken, you are the Broken, having never repaired your gear. This means that you progress through the game without actually using any repair options. If your gear breaks, it has to be replaced, which makes the game very difficult, especially doing any type of endgame content. Dying might not be your biggest risk. It might be dying too much and then your gear breaks, and suddenly you don't want to repair it because you'll lose your badge here. So having extra gear, having cheaper gear that you don't mind getting broken might be a good viable meta. Especially, again, because Wallcraft Hardcore is much different here. If you die, obviously you lose your gear, but eventually your gear is going to break with the Broken badge if that's what you're going for. On to the next one, we have the Terrestrial, and it states you are the Terrestrial, having never used a flight path. This badge indicates that you have never taken a flight path anywhere. You traverse the world on foot or on mount, just heading everywhere by yourself without relying on flight paths. Of course, you have the Traveler as well. You are the Footman, having never used a mount. This means that you've never used a mount to get around. You know, you've walked around on foot. Now, some classes obviously might have this a little bit easier, but most classes have mobility bonuses in Wallcraft, so it's not really too imbalanced in regards to what class is going to be doing it. All you can really be sure of is that you are going around on foot. Now, you will retain the Traveler badge. If you use a flight path, you'll just lose the Terrestrial one, so you know, if you're going for all of them, obviously you don't want to use either, but it depends on what you're more interested in terms of the cosmetic reward for achieving 60. Moving on to the next one, this is probably the most difficult one, because inevitably you will end up forgetting, or you'll fall a little bit too far and you're going to lose this. This is the Earthbound. You've never fallen or jumped, and in fact, I'll throw this badge right now. If you watch, I jump, it goes away, and you never get it back. So that's a very difficult challenge to make it to level 60 without having fallen more than a foot or jumped whatsoever. If you're going for that one, the first thing I suggest you do is unbind your key bindings. And just be aware there are knockback effects such as Shaman's Fire Nova Totem and a few other knockback effects in game that will remove that badge. So you have to be very careful and cautious about who you're fighting. It might be better off just to die. Carry around a Vidir elixir and just die if you see a shaman running at you. Or even better yet, don't let him get close to you and do not stand near that totem. So, There are a few knockback effects, though, that will cancel that badge, so that's probably going to be the most difficult one for people to get. And I knew it would be a difficult one for people to actually reach 60 with, but I figured, hey, why not? Give them a real hard challenge there. The next one we have is the Luddite. Now, the Luddite indicates that you have never used an item. Now, you can equip gear and you can wear items and use weapons with this badge, but it means you can't use items like food or potions or grenades or any on-use items. Now, this triggers 4 quest items. All of these will have pertinence towards quest items, which means that if you were to have a quest objective where you had to use an item, you would lose the badge by doing that. So this is a very specific badge to try and progress to 60 with. You have to be very aware to not use quest items or anything, which is very restrictive on the gameplay if you're trying to go for this one. You know, you might be better off just killing mobs all the way to 60 at that point, or doing what quest you can without requiring to have used an item. Obviously, there's a lot of quests, though, that you will not be able to complete trying to go for this one. This one, especially, the Pauper, you've never looted an item. Frankly, I don't know how people are actually going to make it to 60 with this one. It's going to be a real tough grind because you can't loot items. So how do you make money? How do you get gear? How do you get items? You really can't. So, you know, it's a very tough one. Very tough one. This brings us on to the last one, of course. The Natural. You never equip an item. With the Natural badge, you essentially cannot put on any items. All of your gear is stripped upon making your hardcore character, and they can only be generated at level 1. So, currently on the alpha server, it starts off on GM Island. During the live servers, obviously the hardcore NPCs will be in the starting areas. But yeah, you're not able to flag yourself if you're above level 1, so you have all your items stripped upon entering this mode, and then, you know, if I were to equip an item, in fact, I can go over here. Every hardcore character starts with 1 gold, and that is so that they can buy starting gear, get their spells, help facilitate a little bit easier gameplay. I'd considered maybe even making a little bit less, but I figured since you lose all your items upon entering the mode, it's probably a little bit more straightforward just to give them 1 gold to where they can buy their intro spells and some starting gear. They have a little bit left over for professions. So if we were to go in here and we'll get some starting gear here. In fact, where is a vendor? There we go, weaponsmith right here. We're just going to talk to a weaponsmith, and you can see as soon as I equip the sword, the Natural is going to go away. So we lose the Natural. If I were to kill a mob and loot it, the Pauper would go away. If I were to drink or use a potion or any healing items, stuff like that, obviously the Luddite would go away. If I were to mount up, I'd lose the Traveler, etc. You know, going all the way through. In fact, I'll even take a look here. I'll just add some items so you can kind of see what happens when you die. So when I die out in the open world, I have the option, obviously, to release. You cannot be resurrected. You can't be recovered. The only place that this won't occur is within battlegrounds. I figured I'd keep the integrity of battlegrounds. So if you die in a battleground, you just revive as normal. But if I were to release Spirit, I automatically get ported back to my home bind, which is currently the starting area, and I lose all my items. So if I were out in the open world, let's just go to South Shore. And I die to some South Shore guards. You can see right now, I'm sent back to my hearth location. My hearth is currently set right here from when I started the mode. If I were to go to, let's say, Terran Mill, and I'm just going to set my hearth location to Terran Mill. There you go. Let's make this in my home. And we're going to go to Stormwind. Die to some NPCs. I release, I lose all my items, I'm back in my hearth location. So, It's a very challenging mode. I believe that this game mode is a lot better than traditional hardcore because, again, MMOs aren't really conducive to the traditional hardcore format simply because it's always online, and if something happens where you're dealing with another player who's purposely abusing game mechanics to get you killed, or you lag out, you disconnect, you lose your power, you know, some unfortunate instance like that happens, there's no fallbacks. So in traditional hardcore mode, you're just done, and you hope that you have a good internet connection. You'll find that people with bad internet connections aren't really able to play it. Wallcraft Hardcore, death is only the beginning. You know, it's just the next step in the journey. If I were to die with full tier 2, well, hopefully I've got my tier 1 still sitting in the bank, and I don't make that mistake again. But, you know, that's the risk that I took by bringing it out into the open world. Again, your items in the bank are safe, and later on, of course, with player houses, which I'll show you a player house right now. This is Mook's house. He wanted a house in Hillsbred, so he wanted a house a little bit further away from South Shore with a nice little deck for some fishing. In Wallcraft, you're able to fish while sitting, so it's a very nice, scenic place for him and his friends to hang out. Add a key. Walk in. This is a locking player house door, of course, so you can't just get through. You need the key. It blocks your path here. So death is only the beginning, you know. And in houses in the future, they'll have player storage, which you'll be able to store a few more additional pieces of gear. So you put your reserves in your house or in your bank, and you'll be good to go for the next time. And hopefully it doesn't happen again. Either way, though, I'm very excited to launch this. This has been, like I said, an insanely busy week. Added 2 playable races, 2 professions. 2 new classes are actually in the game, the Death Knight and the Technician. I just haven't fleshed any of their spells out or anything yet. And, of course, Hardcore mode. There's been a few additional changes, some balancing tweaks, and a few different things that have taken place over this past week. But join the Discord. Wallcraft.org has a link for it, and you'll be able to see all the updates. If you're interested in supporting the project, you can find me on Patreon, patreon.com/Wallcraft. And hopefully everybody enjoys the mode. You know, currently it's a little bit late, and I just announced it for the alpha testing server, so we've got 5 people testing it out right now, but it is free to test. Of course, Wallcraft will never charge. It's a private server. There's never ever going to be a cash shop. No pay to win. You know, this is a sole work of passion, supported by the generous donations to my Patreon. And I do this full time, you know, like I said, I've put in 100 hours this week just to get all of this stuff implemented, so it's been a lot of work, but I love what I do and I love doing it. I hope y'all enjoy. Until next time, peace.